dipersembahkan oleh
Welcome to India. My trip to Dharamsala, India this time is a little different from what I experienced 3 years ago. Other than being accompanied by some members of the Buddhist community from Jakarta, we all took the road from New Delhi International Airport straight to Dharamsala, located in north of India. The 12-hour journey on a new toll road is fortunately without mishap, the highlight being encountering marijuana plants growing along the sides of the highway. Leaving the Punjab province and entering Himachal, the landscape changes as our cars climb up steep hills on narrow winding roads, before finally getting us to our hotel in Dharamsala just before midnight. Hello and welcome to Face with me. I'm Desi Anwar in a program that brings the world to your screen and where we meet people who make a difference to our lives. And this time I take you to Dharamsala in the Himachal Pradesh of North India. So join me on my journey here on Face to Face with Desi Anwar. So who really is the Karmapa? And how important is he as a Tibetan Buddhist spiritual leader? And what can we learn from his teachings? And what does he mean by saying that humans possess a noble heart, as he has written in his book? These are some of the questions I have in mind before I'm finally able to meet His Holiness, after a long and complicated process to get the permits from the local authorities. So here I am about to interview His Holiness the 17th Karmapa here in the Gyoto Tantric Monastery, and behind me is the temple, and I will be going in that direction. This is where His Holiness resides, and this is also a monastery where monks live here and study about Buddhism, and also this is where His Holiness receives many guests from all over the world. And I have to tell you, it has not been easy trying to get permission to actually see and interview His Holiness. So it's a very special opportunity for me to meet him. Your Holiness, it's a great pleasure for me to be here, to be received in your absolutely beautiful monastery. And I've just been reading your book, The Heart is Noble, Changing the World from the Inside Out. And I would like to perhaps explore some of your teachings and some of your ideas. What do you see as the main challenges and problems of the 21st century, perhaps different from the previous century, particularly faced by the young people who will be experiencing the 21st century?
In the 21st century, there is a tremendous material development, and as a result of that, people have the tendency to depend on this external material development as a possible cause for their happiness and well-being. The outer material world, or whatever appearances of development that is occurring, not at all reliable. And so in this way, once you put sort of all your hopes and aspirations for happiness and well-being in external material things, when there is tremendous changes in the way of ups and downs, then obviously it affects you and your state of mind. If we want to experience reliable happiness, if we want to experience genuine satisfaction, we just simply can't afford to depend on external material things, and we should, on the other hand, turn more inwardly and begin to look within the resources of our mind towards that effect.
In turning inwardly to look within, and you mentioned also in the title, changing the world from the inside out. What are the ways of doing this effectively so that we can enact changes in the way that we ourselves would like to see the world change?
We have to be able to look at the sort of fundamental reality of the play of the world, not a matter of our own distorted perspective of the world. For instance, when it comes to our livelihood, that situations are dependent on so many conditions. In this way, if we are to experience relatively happy life, then we need to first appreciate that this is dependent on a number of circumstances, a number of situations. So because everything is occurring interdependently and not independently. So for instance, if we want whatever happiness and well-beings, it is not dependent on only external things. That coming together of certain external things or conditions together is not sufficient at all. In fact, it is more importantly dependent on one's mental outlook. Our sort of very confused, myopic outlook is sometimes, so if I can put some effort and energy into making quite a good deal of money, and then I have house together, ideal family together, all these external conditions, then I would be pretty happy. But realistically, that's not how it works. If one wants to be more realistic about it, then maybe more to do with how one addresses one's own state of mind. For instance, there's the need for openness of mind. There is a need for having a more sort of simple and realistic approach to things as opposed to complicated or complex approach. And so in this way, at the same time, allow the natural, the discerning potentials of the mind to become manifest. Given that, then maybe our sort of feelings, emotions in terms of what is really happiness could maybe begin to surface.
The first Karmapa, Dusum Khenpa, was born in eastern Tibet in the year 1110. He was the founder of the teaching lineage of the Karma Kagyu, which is a division of one of the 8 great practice traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. Dusum Khenpa was the first in Buddhist history to leave indications where he would be reborn so that his disciples could search for his reincarnation. He was also the first to identify himself to previous followers after he was reborn. And after 900 years, as each 16 Karmapas have spread the Dharma teachings, then passed away, the latest reincarnation is Ogyen Trinle Dorje, the 17th Karmapa, and tasked in bringing spiritual teachings, nurtured traditionally in the mountains of Tibet, into the 21st century.
I'm interested, how did we evolve into thinking like that, equating happiness with material possession, whereas we actually desire maybe genuine happiness?
Among a number of issues that can be talked about along this line, sort of 2 things stand out. And one is we have this fixation of attaching tremendous difference between the idea of rich and poor, the powerful ones and the weak ones. So we have a tendency to make a very big gap, but failing to acknowledge the actual sort of fundamental reality. The reality is, regardless of whatever relative status or situation you are in, all people without exception yearn for happiness and well-being and yearn for freedom from suffering. And so, but when there is this tremendous gap between the idea of rich and poor and the powerful ones and the weak, and the illusions attached to how the haves have happiness and well-being and the have-nots don't have happiness. It's a matter of fact that simply because somebody is richer doesn't translate into more happiness or greater happiness, or somebody is poorer doesn't necessarily translate into more suffering. In reality, it isn't like that. Another factor where the consumerism is so strong is that because people actually lack the true practical wisdom to see things for what they are, because we either deliberately or more likely in a confused way do not distinguish between wants and needs. And so more than often we prefer to label our wants as needs. And so therefore, once we think of these wants as needs, or has this mistaken illusion that what in reality is what we want, but we think actually it's something we need. Then where do you get all of these needs and wants fulfilled and labeled, more sake of sounding good, your needs, and once for these needs have to come from all the natural resources.
The path to liberation taught by the Karmapas goes back more than 25 centuries of history in India and Tibet. The trail begins in the 6th century BCE in central India, when a young prince seated himself beneath the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya to meditate, and arose the following day as the Buddha. Buddha's teachings, which was introduced to India and later to the world, has this basic message that enlightenment and other forms of spiritual attainment are accessible to people of all classes, races, and genders. This universal access was the logical outcome of the basic truths that the Buddha taught, that the causes of happiness and suffering lie within the mind of each person, and that everyone endowed with the mind has the same basic capacity to free themselves from suffering and attain lasting happiness.
Population increasing, and we're taking more from the planet, more from the earth. We're using more and more of the natural resources that you mentioned. And as a result, we know about the problem of the climate change and the mountains of waste that we produce, for example, because of consumerism. Now, how can we actually get out of this mental, physical, and systemic trap so that we can actually change it for the better, recognize that interdependence, and perhaps create a better planet for the future generation? And what actions can we do? It's concrete.
Okay.
So like with most things, we engage in things with an unrealistic assumption. And that is that natural resources are so vast, so great, they are just completely undimensionable. They're never going to be exhausted. They are inexhaustible. As much as we can use, as much as we can dig out, there is no end to what we can dig out. That is far from reality, far from the fact. 100 years ago, 100 years ago, if we had that kind of attitude, maybe it's sort of excusable. Now, after 100 years later, when we are confronted with the situations that we are confronted with, we just can't content ourselves with our assumptions. We need to acknowledge the fact of the matter that we are directly faced with. Nature, natural resources, the lack of it, the imbalances have introduced very directly themselves to us in the way of the damage and the harm. So, we are where we are. The natural resources are diminishing at some incredible rate. This, of course, by the truth of interdependence, affecting the environment. Yes, we do understand, but we only understand with our brain. We don't act with our heart and with action. And so that again continues. What is in the best interest for down the road, in the future, is put aside. It is not enough. Like, for instance, we right now live in a world and situation where we are not short of information. We are not short of ideas. We are not short of researchers. But ideas, information, and researchers are not enough. You need to translate them on the ground, in action. What is also good for you as well as for others. And what is good for this generation and what will be good for the coming generation. And so that these things need to be put together. And for that, information, knowledge alone is not at all sufficient. There has to be a drastic change, a sort of holistic change in the motivation, attitude with which we address things in a fundamental way.
You mentioned about transferring or connecting the brain to the heart. So how, this is, perhaps it's not as easy as it sounds, because sometimes we get so wrapped up in our brain that we forget about the heart. So how to connect the brain and the heart so that the things that we do have the right intention with the results that we actually want and need.
Now, talking about brain and heart and how we sort of bring it together. Generally speaking, when we're talking about brain, we talk about intellect, intelligence. Intelligence is like a tool that we can use for positive purposes and negative. And when we misuse our intelligence, sort of perverted intelligence, then obviously it can have destructive consequences, like nuclear bombs made with whatever intelligence, you would say. And so therefore that having intelligence alone is not enough. So given that, I personally feel that the core value, the core principle that we need to develop individually is unquestionable, genuine good-heartedness. Genuine good-heartedness from the very depth of our mind, not appearance. We just can't simply do without that value. we have a way of saying this, in Tibetan, given sort of examples of the past. This motivation or this value or principle of good-heartedness, loving-kindness should be like the king, makes the command. And the intelligence should be like the ministers that put this command into action. And so in this way, sort of command and control from that point of view. And so fundamentally that we must have this value or the principle that we never move outside of the perimeter of good-heartedness, that our actions come only from within the perimeter of good-heartedness.
I'm interested to see for myself how the Buddhist lamas practice their simple life full of compassion and mindfulness. For this, I visit Palpung Sherabling Monastery, which is about 2 hours' drive north of Dharamsala, through some of the most beautiful sceneries in northern India.
Kempa, this is beautiful. Thank you for bringing me here. Tell me a little bit more about this place.
Oh, yeah, this place name is Gopalpur. This place is more famous also. Many tourists come here and they like it of the see the mountain, rivers. Yeah.
I know, this is a great spot for taking photos.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely here, but we have to move on, Kempo.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah, thank
let's
you.
go.
Here at Palpung Sherabling Monastery, the students are taught rituals, art, retreat practices and scholarly texts, which are within the 4 aspects of what the monastery is offering: spirituality, education, health and culture. Currently there are about 750 monks residing here, with 250 of them enrolled in the monastic university curriculum. At 3,950 meters above sea level, the main monastery of Palpung is an extraordinary structure, with the main hall as tall as 40 meters. It has been said that this is the 2nd largest standing traditional Tibetan building in the world.
Kempo,
Yes.
this is a classroom.
Yeah, this is classroom and have the many class. This is one of Kempo's classroom, Kempo Kalten's classroom. Now inside they have the teaching.
Teaching? Okay.
Teaching, yeah.
Should we go in and see what he's teaching
So,
them?
okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah.
But these values need to be spread, to be taught. And yet, the dominant values that we see in today's world actually generate values that are based on maybe competition. We have winners are good, losers are not good, for example. So where do you think we can find, even in some religions perhaps, they don't give us the values of tolerance and harmony and love?
Mm-hmm.
Can it come from the heart?
Okay.
Now, more than ever, we should wake up to this reality of interdependence. Because of everything that is happening around us, becoming closer and so forth, as we talked about, we should realize how closely connected we are all, how interdependently we have to exist and live, to the extent that we should think of ourselves not in a fashionable way, but in a realistic way, a sense of global, citizenship. That is like the world is your home. The world is your family. And so that you should have a sense of responsibility for your home, for the sort of safekeeping of your home. Along that line, different religious traditions should not act like they're there to create boundaries among each other. They should be there to dismantle boundaries. So in this way, religious leaders, important figures of the world should maybe move towards that. But the main responsibility for this to become a practical reality lies upon each and every individual. We talk about rights. This is your right. This is the right you should claim. This is the right that one should recognize. You should learn more about this right of yours and in this responsibility.
So I'm attending a prayer here at a Tibet school called Suja School, and it's a very special day for the school children here because for the first time they have actually reached year 12. So they are celebrating and praying for the fact that the students have managed to attain year 12, and the prayers are being attended by all the schools in the local community led by the Rinpoches, and also praying for the welfare of the Tibetans, the Buddhist Tibetans who are here, as well as a general prayer for the world in general.
During the event at the Suja Tibetan School, the attendees also received Dharma teaching from the 12th Khenting Taisi Tupa Rinpoche, another important Tibetan Buddhist leader, who kindly receives me after the event at the Palpung Sharabling Monastery, where he formerly resides.
We'll be meeting with Karmapa tomorrow. Perhaps you could enlighten me. Who is the figure of Karmapa?
Karmapa is actually Sanskrit. Karma is Sanskrit word. It means activity. Karma activity. So he is a prophesized Buddha in quite few sutras and quite number of tantras, and he is this 17th incarnation. And first Karmapa was born exactly 902 years ago.
Wow.
He represents the activity of the Buddha. So karma means activity. So his activity is to serve the Buddha by spreading the Buddha's teaching and help the sentient being representing Buddha's activity. So that is what Karmapa means. Means one who fulfills the activities of the Buddha.
Your Holiness, if I can ask you more about your own experience. You yourself have experienced hardship in the past. Perhaps you could share with us how you dealt with those hardships, and how has, for example, your childhood, living in a nomadic community, how has it shaped you as a person and your worldview, particularly about things like the environment?
I was born very remote place, the remote part of the world, a nomadic environment, and during that time where I was born, there was no sign of modernity. I'm very thankful, very fortunate in that way. I had the good fortune to experience very simple and direct, the traditional way of life. So where one had the good fortune to be so close to nature. And I had first-hand experience of witnessing clean, pure water and breathe clean, fresh air. And so I recognize the value of such, how precious these are. So when I have the opportunity to, whatever degree, talk about, address about the importance or significance of the environment, honestly, I'm not bringing it on the table, so to speak, as a matter of just ideas, not as a sort of philosophical perspective, but having had the personal experience of having enjoyed them, and at the same time witnessing the tremendous pace of the destructions of the environment, and when I have the opportunity sort of to reminisce and to think of how it was like, even the memory itself is incredibly precious.
Throughout the lifetimes of the first 16 Karmapas, the procedures for recognizing a Karmapa reincarnation were respected and followed. After the 16th Karmapa passed away in 1981, his 4 heart disciples, including Situ Rinpoche, initiated the recognition process. Despite their collective efforts in their quest to find the Lama, the 4 made little progress. It was not until the end of 1990 when the first sign finally came to light, when Tai Situ Rinpoche found a sealed envelope inside an amulet that the 16th Karmapa had given him years before. The letter contained all the indications needed for the disciples to find the next Karmapa. Apo Gaga, the young nomad, who was only 7 years old when the Lamas arrived at his family's camp, was immediately recognized as the 17th Karmapa Ogyen Trinley Dorje, verified not only by Tai Situ Rinpoche and many other major Karma Kagyu Lamas, but also by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Soon after, the young Karmapa was brought to Tsupu Monastery in central Tibet, where he was enthroned and given his monastic ordination. Along with his efforts to preserve and present Tibetan culture, the Karmapa has also traveled across India to take part in the cultural and religious life of his adopted home. 2 issues that the Karmapa has particularly championed are women's rights and environmental protection. As an environmental activist and world spiritual leader, whose teachings are often webcast live, the Karmapa is clearly bringing his lineage's activities fully into the 21st century. On top of that, His Holiness is also a scholar and meditation master, as well as a painter, poet, songwriter, and playwright.
Finally, as the 17th Karmapa, what would you like to see accomplished while you're here, and the contribution or message that you would like to share with the world?
At 7, big change took place in my life. I was separated from my parents, from my childhood friends, and landed in unknown and unacquainted environment. A lot of big changes, and great degree without one's choice. And after that, now also one is surrounded by all kinds of situations that is not in one's interest or within one's controls, societal circumstances, political circumstances. And then, of course, being at a young age, there are certain things that I certainly don't even comprehend. So yes, I feel share of difficulties and challenges, and obviously these have affected my outlook as well as my activities. And given that, the circumstances, situations that I'm in, I do not have any sort of vast or great visions or plan. And maybe I don't even have the ability to fulfill whatever plans. But nevertheless, what I am certainly free to have, and what I do, is to embrace within my heart the sincere, heartfelt aspiration that I might be able to make some caring and good-hearted contribution of good-heartedness to the world in general, and particularly to those with whom I find myself interacting, or with whoever in the world I interact. So I strongly make the aspiration I want to always carry and cherish the genuine heart of loving kindness and good-heartedness, and to sustain it, and to recognize with awareness that pricelessly precious thing to have. And if I can keep going on, I feel it will be actually quite meaningful. And so that's my intention and aspiration.
Thank you very much, Your Holiness. And we look forward to your visit to Indonesia.
Yes, I think so. Thank you so much. Thank you.
What impresses me about the 17th Karmapa is the fact that despite his young age, he not only already displays a wisdom and understanding of the workings of the human mind and the human heart, manifesting the teachings of the ancient lineage that he continues, but he's also very much a product of his time, with a clear understanding of the issues and challenges that the present day faces. Clearly, this is a world spiritual leader in the making, with the capacity to contribute to solve this century's global problems.
So what have I learned from my conversations with His Holiness the 17th of Karmapa? Well, I'm struck by the fact that despite his past hardship and present limitations to his circumstances, his greatest concern is to remind us, his fellow human beings, of the dangers of materialism and consumerism, and also to increase our appreciation of nature. He also reminds us that we live in an interdependent world, and as such, we should strive to be less selfish, less greedy, and less destructive to our nature. For it is in living in harmony, not just with each other, but also with our environment and the planet, can we reach real and sustainable happiness.
And that's all for this episode. Don't forget to join me in our next episode of Face to Face, where we meet another figure who makes a difference to our lives here on Face to Face with Desi Anwar, bringing you the world.